Not council meeting. We've had those. We have a great meeting. This is the committee of the whole, June 21st. And I'll call the meeting to order, and you can see the agenda. We are back to hear more from Michael, and Judy, and Jennifer on our development guide and vision, as well as the water policy research project. So this is an area that we've all been really interested in and look forward to hearing more. But first, the approval of the minutes that were sent out in advance from June 7th. Is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second. Thank you, thank you. Any corrections, deletions, additions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. And Michael Larson, as if by magic, has appeared.
A little bit prematurely, but I'm ready to go.
You're ready to go. All right, so we'll start with item 1. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the rest of the council members. I'm Mike Larson, Planning Analyst in the Community Development Division and Manager of the Values, Vision, and Goals process for the 2050 Regional Development Guide, and I'm pleased to join you again to give you an update on our progress. So I have several, is this working? There we go. Oops, a little delay. Okay, there we go.
I think it's out of my back.
Is that-
Sorry about that.
No worries. Glad it's not me. So I have several goals for our session today with you to review and reinforce the work that we've done to date, to summarize and discuss more recent stakeholder input, including from system and policy planners at the council, to review our proposed changes that we have for you, get your feedback, and hopefully get an informal endorsement of these changes for the working regional vision, and review some of the next steps that we'll take as an organization as a result of this work. So I've shown this slide many times in past presentations to various groups, including ourselves. It's really meant to emphasize that our articulation of a vision for the region is meant to set a stage. It's not meant to be set in stone. We do think that the values language that the council informally endorsed in February is fairly durable in terms of the feedback we've gotten and well supported. So we're really not anticipating or proposing any changes to that. Those value statements were included in your information packet, so you're welcome to reference that in our discussion. The different policy areas are at different stages in their work plans, but we've had opportunities to consider how well this language works as a result of feedback from external stakeholders, as well as seasoned and new policy planners alike. So as expected, there has been an evolution in our thinking around this language. Again, I just offhand, we're looking for language that, both inspires for the future of the region, but that as well as it's functional for our policy work and implementation. So after numerous sessions last year and input from various stakeholders, primarily council advisory bodies, but others as well, the council endorsed a working set of regional core values and a set of 4 regional vision statements. And these vision statements were based on a set of 4 cross-cutting regional issues that we had identified and that you see here on the screen. What is significant about this at these areas, as we've discussed before, are cut across all of our policy domains and require us in very specific ways to work together with one another. We have received additional feedback over the last few months, including but not limited to engagement that we've had with the Transportation Policy Plan Advisory Work Group, recently with the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, as well as the Young Leaders Collaborative that you've heard from recently, as well as system and policy planners that are charged with this policy development and implementation. So generally speaking, we think the vision statements seem to resonate well. How, though, the vision relates to the economy and matters of accessibility come up frequently, and we have some responses to that specific feedback that we'll share shortly. And finally, and of particular significance, a major source of our proposal for you today is a suggestion from our system and policy planners that first, the vision statements that you've informally endorsed could function well as high-level goal statements. And if we do that, we need a synthesizing, succinct, concise vision statement that's sort of a unifying narrative for our planning work. So before we get into that, I want to discuss a little bit of the dynamics that have occurred as a result of engaging around this language. So as you might expect, the statements do inspire discussion, but oftentimes they raise questions as well as about what things might mean and how certain words or phrases mean different things in different contexts. Different stakeholders want to see their issues, want their issues to be seen clearly and included in this work. We are trying to resist being overly specific for this type of language so that the system and policy planners are given broad direction, but rather than constraining how they might articulate their work. So when we get into more specific languages, we start to see things unravel a little bit, like are we including the right things, are we leaving things certain out? We want to leave that a little bit to the system and policy plan development to respond to and help articulate what that means in their particular domain. So inevitably, like conversations that we've had with you, conversations we've had with other groups, people want to talk about what they want to talk about, and that's fine. But it really informs our work going forward and setting the stage for further engagement. And I guess one particular example that we had with the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, of course, we got into a lot of discussion about what accessibility means. But we also got into a level of nuance that we hope to see integrated in future policy work. Issues like not just access, but usability, universal design, and that kind of thing. That not necessarily appropriate for this level of framing language, but something that we would want to see. Sorry about that. So, you know, obviously, one of the things we see is the different language is difficult. One of the things we see is the difference between what things denote and the different connotations that language has. Policy area interpretation, like, well, this means this thing to us, this means something else to another area. Having those conversations, I think, is really important for identifying those opportunities where we can collaborate together. And as a result of this experience too, we had some general recommendations about moving forward, you know, really to acknowledge and support the political dynamics that occur as a result of this policy work. You know, oftentimes we start to head down the path of talking about priorities and resource allocation and that kind of thing. So I think an important message for us is that being successful in our shared goals will pay dividends in other policy areas, and we can do many things well at the same time, especially if we're working together on our shared goals. So part of this really involves some shared learning, clarification about what we mean, and creation of shared meaning. So I'm going to start to get into areas where we kind of what we're proposing for you and to get your reaction. On the screen now is the endorsed vision language from February. Some of this language is more vision oriented. Some of the leading languages could inform a synthesis narrative for us. On the other hand, some of this language is a lot more specific and could evolve into a set of 4 cross-cutting goals where policy plans can respond or create shared objectives and how they interpret and how they see implementing this particular vision. Objectives from the policy plan are areas that are achievable results in each area of council responsibility that could advance these regional goals. So kind of trying to think about these as a set of information here that could inform 2 different things in our input. So for example, we're on the screen here, we're showing language related to the vision statement. The leading language really contributes to an overall narrative. The second part really could function as a cross-cutting goal. And so we've done that for each of the 4 vision statements and have further suggestions about how we can modify that. So take you through. So the next set of slides here is meant to be a structure to walk through our recommendations and solicit your feedback. On the left, there are a couple of examples of trying to create an overarching integrated vision statement that synthesizes both values and substantive matters. You may be familiar with environmental services, very brief vision statement of clean water for future generations. Now we don't really expect the regional development guide's vision to be that succinct. We are attempting to consider a succinct vision statement that stands in for the regional development guide as a whole. So on the right, so we won't belabor this right at the moment, but on our right are those transformed vision statements that are abbreviated and we believe serve as these high-level goals for the region to work toward. So next, I'd like to go through the additional set of recommendations for the council to get your feedback. Our first, so to transform these into regional goals, the first set of changes shown here relate to creating slightly more succinct goal statements that are more consistent with common phrasing. Regarding the first goal here, equitable and inclusive is a more common phrase. While we propose striking welcoming from the title, it's still included in the descriptive language that follows. In past discussions with you, we do recall, and we've heard many times, that the goal of having a welcoming region resonates with people, but in some cases, I think it's seen as patronizing. So that surprised me to hear that. But I think overall, the idea of having a region that's welcoming to all still resonates with most people. So while the goals are largely written in generalities, there are certain things that call us to be more precise. That includes a suggestion to lead with racial inequities and to consider the historical context of all marginalized communities. We believe that the changes shown here in the first and second create a more powerful statement with the needed specificity. Now, with regard to the second goal, healthy and safe is a more common phrase than healthy, safe, and vibrant. And Councilmember Wolf, we kept in mind your previous comments from February. We take all feedback very seriously. That whether vibrant was a dated term. The idea of vibrancy was a word that tried to incorporate, but not limited to, say, the vibrancy of our economy. So just hold that thought in terms of trying to clarify this particular goal. We haven't, if you've read the materials in the presentation in advance, you'll know that we had a fifth goal to kind of to meet some sort of a missing piece here. And the term agency is a little bit problematic. I think it was used here. It's not a common word, and we've had some feedback to describe what that means. So we are trying to strike a balance between creating shared meaning around perhaps some new terms, but also keep it somewhat plain language. And the word dignity really resonated with a lot of staff people in terms of creating, and so we proposed that minor change. So our next, and we can, when I'm finished here, I'm happy to kind of go back and walk through all of these and get your feedback. So our next suggested change is an entirely new goal that states our region is dynamic and resilient. This goal specifically responds to the feedback related to our economy, but does so in the context of community. Choice, accessibility, affordability are themes that arise. And when we think about economic opportunities, housing, the services that we provide as a region, getting around the region, access, that kind of thing, we felt this was a good synthesis of sort of those missing pieces and responds well to the work and the engagement that we've done in some of the policy areas. This goal is in service of some of the thoughts that are occurring in some of that policy development. So I want to talk a little bit about the word accessibility, since it's come up a lot, and that's one of those words that can mean different things in different contexts. And that we consider that a responsibility of the system of policy planners and stakeholders to help us identify what that means in different contexts. So our final recommended changes are meant to clarify or reinforce. For the goal, we lead on addressing climate change. We recommend removing the word eliminated for a couple of reasons. We have mitigated greenhouse gas emissions rather than we have eliminated or mitigated risk. Climate planners consider that term mitigation to include reduction up to and including elimination or prevention of GHG production from certain industries or activities. But since GHG occurs from many natural processes and is part of our ecosystem, the term elimination may come across as overly broad or perhaps naive in terms of how we address our climate process. So be interested to hear what you think about that. So since we just clarified, someone suggested to add to climate impacts, resilient to climate impacts, since we also used the word resilient in the previous goal. And then the last one around we protect and restore natural systems. We are suggesting removing the qualifier increasingly. That just seemed like, it's somewhat an absolute. We work to protect. We don't, not necessarily all, but we protect, integrate, and restore natural systems. And we're suggesting a reference to habitat, as well as just to make it to broader and more inclusive, and not just for the experience of humans, but our connection with the natural environment, or made that more specifically. And we removed the qualifier growing. We thought that how much or how little we grow is irrelevant to this work. But I will say that some of the scenario planning that we're doing, and that you may have been participating in, will participate in, how we protect habitats and how we restore and protect natural systems would be different under each of the different scenarios, where the nature, location of that growth, how we approach that. So with that, Mr. Chair, before I've got just a little more about sort of next steps about this language, but I'd like to stop there and get yours and the council members' feedback about some of the changes that an approach that we're taking.
Thank you, Michael, and it's really gratifying to see that you are presenting, but you're also listening, and some of this is what we were been talking about. Was that February? It seems like
Yes.
Just the other day.
Yes.
Any thoughts, comments, questions at this point? Read them.
Okay, so this is really good, whoever was working on kind of the updates and modification, it looks very thoughtful. I was thinking about the areas where you mentioned there might have been a little bit of struggle or trying to figure out which word might be better. So I looked up the definition of agency in terms of how it might be used. And one was related to the meaning of a person having agency.
Yes.
And that's what I think you were getting at.
Yes.
And it says a sense of agency refers to the feeling of control over actions and their consequences. Before I looked the definition up, the word ownership came into my mind. So I'm wondering if that might be in addition to the dignity, because I think the ownership gets to the agency more so than dignity. I think dignity stands on its own. And then where we were talking about looking at external system, equity, going back to equity, I'm not sure what slide that was on.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss,
Or-
all of the proposed changes are here. Were you referring to something else?
It might be in one of those statements, but you were talking about broad leadership
Right.
at one point. So I was thinking that maybe going a little bit deeper might include inclusive leadership, broad inclusive leadership.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, I think in your information packet, we do have, I think it's one of the values does articulate the role of leadership, and I'm just looking quickly, I don't have a slide for this, but.
Oh, so I'm looking at the informational piece, not the presentation.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's where
okay,
it was referenced. And it's split up by equity, leadership, accountability, and stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
So under leadership, it talks about we need broad leadership to help confront the significant challenges we face. So I thought maybe adding broad inclusive leadership. And then since I have the floor and I didn't see a whole bunch of hands up, Chair, may I
Keep going.
add one more thing?
Sure.
And that is when we are looking at trying to reduce, acknowledge historical harms for marginalized communities. In order to do that, if we don't have a trend about that harm, then I think it's important for us to kind of have a standard action of establishing a baseline of where we are today. And even if we do have that historical background, starting with that baseline for measuring our goals, I think is really important. And I think sometimes we miss that. Oftentimes we miss that. That's it.
Great, thank you. Tolka. Tony first, then you.
We need to be. I appreciate the openness to change and the work that you have done to ensure that the thoughts of participants have been included here in such a way that this is not just ours, but it belongs to all of us, you know, in terms of the vision, the goals that we're working with and looking at right now. And the first comment I've made is that since we started out with those vision-like statements and are now looking to transition those into workable goals, it feels as though, and I hate to say this because I know we're really close, it does feel as though, I have to say it,
Please do.
we are still in between vision, which has not yet been succinctly stated, and goals. And as though the goal statements as reworked still feel a little like vision. You know, I don't want to go through all the words, but I just want to make that comment to get that out. As I think about the region, I appreciate the statements about the region, the statements about the community and how we lead, protect and restore natural systems. Just, you know, I said I wasn't going through all the words, so I didn't use them all. The piece that may be missing for me, although there is a statement about residents inside our community statement, may be that in the goals, I expect the residents to be even more centered. And so as I look at and think about our statements about the region, about the communities and how we lead, you know, I want to lift up the residents, organizations, and businesses, or however we might state that a little more inside the goals. I am not trying to wordsmith, but I just want to give that sense, first, that we seem to be still between the vision and goals.
Right.
And you seem to also recognize that a little bit. as we think about the goals, I want to be sure that they're measurable.
Right.
And so I'd love to know your thoughts about how the goals are, in fact, in each area measurable. I do like the addition of the dynamic and resilient goal, and I think there are some very, very clear ways of measuring that. I also want to know for the goals, which can be lifted into a vision, how we measure each area. And I'm not sure if that is here right at this point in time, since we're still working on them in advance. So just a few comments that I want to unload because they're there and I don't know what to do with those thoughts, and any responses are welcome.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, thank you for those. I think I do have a response that might be helpful, and I appreciate your reaction to that. Frankly, it was difficult. It's a difficult process to propose to you a synthesis vision statement that really hits the mark. And so one of the ideas we have is that perhaps this could be a task or activity for one or more of the council working groups that are going to be formed. It was, to represent the future of the region with something sort of pithy was difficult. Mm-hmm. I think there's also, naturally, a level of generality here that calls for more specificity, calls for more definition. I think one of the most immediate charges for our policy and system planners is to respond to these goals, to help with definition, to help with further articulation, to define what kinds of objectives and measurable objectives in service of these goals. And some of my next steps there's one more slide about next steps that emphasize that. And I think when we talk about, I've talked in the past about the difficulty of language in creating shared meaning. Lots of language here requires definition. Who are residents, which residents, where, what kinds of places and communities are we? And I think there's a real opportunity to kind of further unfold and unpack this language with additional work. And there's no shortage of ideas or work that's been done to date or things that are planned that can help further articulate that.
Well, I appreciate your response, and of course, I know we're in process, and there are many steps to be taken yet.
And I am very anxious to kind of take it to the next level with my partners in the organization to continue to have those conversations about defining what we mean, what our role and influence, and who our partners are in this work.
It's efficient.
Thank you. So I thank you for all the work that went into it, because even though it's different languages and we're debating and we're talking about terms used, but it really speaks to the value and guides sort of how the council will do planning policies over the next decade. And so I think it's really important to get it right. So I'm going to pre-apologize if it sounds like wordsmithing. So my recommendation is to actually put it on a document and share it with the council members, and we can wordsmith and also make changes there or recommend changes. This may be easier than a work group meeting, but a couple of different things I wanted to point out is if the third bullet, our region is dynamic and resilient, if that is meant to address a point towards economy, it doesn't come through. I would just say our economy is diverse and robust. The word resilient and dynamic doesn't speak to it. So that would be my one recommendation on climate change. We address rather than we lead on. I think we may be past the leading on climate now. And then on protect natural resources, I think under the description, you could just say we protect natural habitat and restore natural systems. And I think there needs to be a sentence around access, equitable access. And I think this is what we know, like not all communities access and feel in the park in the same way. So I think a statement around it but I'm happy to wordsmith or like make concrete recommendations if you share in the Word document. That could be our homework. Thank you.
Yeah. Great thoughts. Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Michael, for the work on this. I just really like watching iterations and how they develop. I agree with everything that's been said by my colleagues. And Councilmember Carter, I think the word I was looking for was, but in the sort of the communities piece, that's missing is this people being centered. And I don't feel it hugely there, and maybe it doesn't need to be there, but that's what resonated with me when you were talking. And Councilmember Darker, I agree with the piece about dynamic and resilient, and I had written down the exact same comment. And it seems very specific to the economy, which is fine, but that doesn't really feel like that when you say things like the opportunities and challenges faced by our communities, that's almost unlimited, right? And both those challenges and opportunities, but if we're speaking specifically about the economy, which is then iterated in the second part, so not to get too wordsmithy here, but I think that our region has a dynamic and resilient economy, or something like that, really meets that, clarifies for me that goal. And then just under, and again, getting kind of more style, but leading on addressing climate change. I agree with Councilmember Goger said it's more addressing climate change, but the explanation underneath the goal is in a different tense and kind of a different, so it makes it a different statement that we have mitigated, and that could be the goal or the vision, but the others are all present tense, right? So it's just a little different in the shape and style of it. And then I'm gonna get really wordsmithy here, Michael, I apologize for that. But there's something about, I can see why you looked at the word agency and had some different thinking on there. There's something about the word dignity that just really rubs me the wrong way. And I think, historically it has to do with rank and things like that. And for me, it starts to put a moral value over what we're trying to do here. And so, if people live rewarding lives with a sense of security, value, and well-being or something. But the word dignity seems like it comes from a different century and kind of a differing mindset. So I was quickly looking at the etymology of dignity, and it does come from a different century and sort of a ranking kind of mindset. So anyway, that's my wordsmithing for today. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren, I appreciate hearing how you react to specific words. There's no shortage of terminology that have very divergent views about how they react to a particular word. Some people were very, had the opposite reaction with the dignity. So I think that does come with it. And I think the sort of these conversations are as almost more important than maybe the words we land on, because it will be difficult to write language that means the exact same thing to everyone. So it is a challenge response. But the insight about tense, I think at one point I discussed with you my research on the 3 or 4 or 5 different present tenses that exist in the English language.
Sure.
So we're trying to use various forms of present tense as speaking as if, in a unified way. So.
Back to you.
Just quickly, and I think this again is on the information item, where we have those same statements, but it's, the heading is Working Region Vision Statements. So, in listening to what Commissioner Tony Carter said, I think that might be kind of like in between the high-level vision examples that are on the left side, with the vision statements giving a little bit more clarity to those high-level visions. And then from those vision statements, we could have those more specific goals that tie to the different components of those vision statements. So whether it be inequities or injustice, or some of those words within each vision statements, could actually become goals that would be measurable in the short term, the medium term, and the long term. So I'm not sure if the plan was to change from vision statements to goals,
Yes.
but maybe not changing would be okay.
Mr. Chair, Council Member, we've had a lot of conversation internally with managers and policy plan managers and writers and process people, and we kind of wrestled over creating language that, again, that is both inspiring as well as functional. And we think that by evolving this language from rather a set of vision statements to slightly more of taking that inspiration, essentially turning them into goals, some more precise goals, we can then move forward with our policy development, give them the direction that they've been responding to this language, but we've kind of been struggling a little bit with needing a set of goals so that the policy plans can react to, like, we need to operationalize this, we need to respond to something specifically. So we are proposing these as these modified vision statements as a set of cross-cutting regional goals, again, evolving from those cross-cutting issues, and that we replace our so-called vision with a brief narrative kind of thing that you hang on the wall, kind of like, again, clean water for future generations, but sort of kind of a big picture one you can, it's short enough so that when the council employees come in there, or you come in, you can say, it might have some inspirational pictures, but it's short enough to, you read it and you're like, that's what we do. That's the integrated thing. So I think we are recommending this because we think it gives us the structure that we need to make progress together and continue to collaborate and integrate our work.
Gail.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate everybody's comments, and I'd like to focus on the very last, we protect and restore natural systems. And it's just not resonating with me. And so a couple things is, I like the we protect and restore natural systems. There's a couple things. There's one, to ensure a high quality of life for our region, but it's really a high quality of life for our residents and the people who live in the region. So, I mean, that's really, I think, key, trying to bring the people back into these goals. And then it's not necessarily wordsmithing, but it's just kind of a stickler for when you say to protect habitat, we say in the top, we protect and restore natural systems, and your habitat has a definition that also means a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yes.
So we're protecting more than just the habitat, but you don't want a laundry list of things, but you don't want just one thing that can mean a lot of different things. So somehow I think this has to be wordsmithed a little bit more or expanded. Those are my comments there.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cedarberg, I appreciate your insights. And I will say, all of these thoughts have gone inside my head or inside the head of my colleagues. I guess I would suggest, if we, and I think a little, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to create language that is both concise and powerful. So I guess what I'm hearing you say, maybe as a suggestion, is high quality of life for the people of our region. It's just a simple thing like that. And I've heard you say it's not people-centered enough. I've heard that from staff too. So I am making an effort to do that. But so that is my suggestion to make that tweak. So we do, again, we want it to be both inspiring and functional. So that we can then turn it into things that we do, things that we fund, things that we measure.
Tony, then Wendy.
Wendy, you can go. That'd be fine.
Me to go first? Okay.
Sure.
On the first goal, it seems to me by having racial carved out and then everybody else, we're saying that's the most important over everybody else. And I think there's been some movement from the equity committee that that is how it should be, but I think it was better the way it was before. I mean, when you look at, we keep talking about redlining and things that were more than 50 years ago, but it's only been 30 years since people with disabilities have had the right to have access through the ADA. And we still have parts of our facilities that are not accessible. And, you know, just looking 2 years ago in COVID, we had people with disabilities who were kept basically prisoner in their bedroom for months on end, not allowed to go to work or see anybody. The people who worked in the group homes and the nursing homes could go to and from and see their families, but people with disabilities were considered less and didn't need to be able to leave their homes. And I think by saying that racial inequities are more important than everything else, we're devaluing any other kind of inequities, and I don't think that that's fair or inclusive to pick one group over everybody else in the inequities.
Great, thank you. Tony?
Appreciate the vibrant, and I will use that word, vibrant, discussion around this, and you're intaking all of our comments and thoughts. There was one thing, when you spoke about boiling this down to kind of an elevator speech of a vision, I really do like that. When Councilmember Chambliss spoke about the possibility that those vision statements could remain as vision statements, and that other more succinct statements could become goals, I thought about that as well. And there's some space for either, you know, to happen, such as those vision statements remaining, and a longer vision, you know, where we have a succinct statement that is that elevator, you know, with yet a longer statement of vision that could incorporate these vision statements that we have today. But you know, we're in this process of producing, and until we get the product, you know, it's kind of hard to feel satisfied. We're not supposed to be, right? We're working through this together. But my sense is that we still have, although we'll have goal statements, I like goal statements to be more succinct and measurable, you know, as we've said. Vision statements tend to point toward, you know, this is what we really want, this is what we love, you know, this is where my heart will sing. Goal statements tend to be more concrete and able to be accomplished within a period of time. And of course, then we're going to develop those strategies that say, because we have these goals and we want to measure them, you know, these are the strategies we're going to use to employ them. So I think we've got these steps, and I appreciate that you're in that process. And we can either go with that brief, succinct vision that has its supportive statements in the vision, or we can move them to the goals. The goals do have to be very, very measurable. So you're going to be working through that and get back to us. But I just want you to know that I feel we've got space to create, you know, still, and that we don't have to nail it today. And that in fact, if we do have that longer vision statement, perhaps we can feel more comfortable incorporating the broader sense, even, you know, such as Councilman Wolf mentioned, of greater issues. You know, I tend to feel that racial equity is representative of all equity. So I don't get, you know, I don't get that sense that we're leaving people out when we call it out. That is something that we have been less willing through history to call out. So I think that is one of the reasons we continue to do that. But we've got time also to work through that and to figure out how it is placed, whether it's in vision, whether it's in goals, whether it, And I don't think it needs to go below that, you know. Certainly has to be in the vision, certainly has to be in the goal, no lower than that. But I just think we've got space, and thank you for trying to move us into that place of real definition, because we don't have a ton of time. But I would hate for us to decide, well, this is gonna be vision today, because we don't have it yet, you know, and this is, these 4 are going 5 now. So definitely be goal. Just a comment.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember, appreciate your additional thoughts. I do have a couple of reactions. I hope that perhaps there is an opportunity to wrestle with an articulation overall vision statement, and that might be something that you can own as a council together. That would be one thing. Another thing that comes to mind is, I mentioned a lot, but the concept of progressive elaboration. And again, these are not, we'll just say that we are succinct until we need to provide more information, and then we further define ourselves and further articulate as is needed. And I think we will continue to do so. So these are not, you probably heard the term SMART goals: smart, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. Those aren't these. That's not these. And so I think when we get into more policy, the policy work as we articulate some of the existing conditions work for a region. We're benchmarking ourselves versus other region, benchmarking, various, related to, inequities or climate. You will start to see more concrete information out of which being able to create some time-bound, realistic, achievable goals based on their set of responsibilities and authorities. And so, again, I think the working groups will be able to have the time and space and create a container for you all to get into some of the work, for us to present some of that baseline information, just move in that direction, and for us to come to you with the technical, appropriate amount of technical information in summary.
Thanks for not boxing us in yet.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Okay, Robert,
Thanks.
John.
Oh, great, thanks. I'll be quick because it's quite a line. So I love the approach of getting down to something really brief that everyone can read every day and apply to their work. Lifting up the model from water to clean water for future generations. Brilliant, right? We all know what that means. Well done. And can we come to something like that?
Less is more.
Less is more. I love that. And so I look forward to sort of refining down into something like that. And then just on the equitable and inclusive, and I really feel like we continue to need to lift up racial inequities. I like that we use the word injustice, and so that theme is there. That damage has been done, and we all know the data, right? By pretty much every statistic that we measure inequities, our region has some of the greatest disparities in the country. And we can only imagine that those are because the causes of those disparities are deeply ingrained in our systems and in our institutions, of which we are one. So I feel like we need to keep lifting that up, and and I'm not, and I don't feel like that is picking winners and losers. I think there's space for all kinds of inequities and all kinds of disparities. Unfortunately, right? Unfortunately, sad but true. And Councilman Whip and I were talking the other day, and we have data that shows that our region has the greatest disparities in the country, or practically, or pretty much in the whole country, as it pertains to race, right? And I don't know if it's the same as it pertains to abilities. So maybe that's a piece of research we need to do to determine. But as we're looking to what this is 2050, right? As we're looking to where the demographics are going, as we grow, and if we exclude racial inequities and repairing the injustices that have been done, we're going to have a progressively poorer, weaker region. So I think it's important to continue to lift that up, and I will keep making that argument throughout this process. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I know we're going to hear from John and then Angie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You won't hear any wordsmithing from me. I'll tell you right now, that's not one of my strong suits, and I had to go back. I'm just a street kid in South Minneapolis here, so when I look at this thing, I look back at just our previous meeting when we had a whole presentation on equity. And they talked about what the impact is in our Green Line expansion and what it meant to the communities and how we're using it. And it had us responding very on a more personal level on what could be happening in North Minneapolis. So I'm just fearful that we make these things so high and broad that they're hard to implement when we're actually doing the work. And I think that's across the board of what we're doing. We had a great presentation last night from the Environmental Services before the Equity Committee, Advisory Committee. And we talked specifically about what water means and to us and our work in equity. I thought it was very clear. I thought it was a good meeting. And I'll go back again and take that presentation that we had on equity and look and see how well we are doing to connect these two. Because otherwise we'll have a great document that'll sit on the shelf for a long time, for the next 50.
Or the ones and zeros will be in cyberspace. Mr. Chair, Councilmember Pacheco, thank you for those comments. There's I think an expression where like driving the car as we build it, so there's a little bit of that going on, and so and I had mentioned coming back to you with additional data, and certainly there's no shortage of information that's been shared with you in conversations that you participated in, and I think we intend to come again with concrete, succinct sets of information, including objectives for each of the policy areas that will provide that level of specificity. So we do want to operationalize this to a greater degree. We don't intend to stay at this level. And Mr. Chair, I guess I'll pull this slide up to just very broadly share these next steps about the policy areas. We have been discussing equity. We've presented to you on. You'll hear much more detail in a moment, hopefully, regarding the water resources policy work. There has been and will continue to be stakeholder engagement. We will learn from that experience, and we will continue to clarify what we mean, develop shared meaning, and come back with responses more specific responses to this work and what that means in these policy areas. And again, develop measures of progress and accountability. And I think our research folks, our research unit, our data scientists, and the qualitative data folks will participate in supporting you in that process.
Thank you. And Angie, you had your hand up, Sean.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes along with what Mike was just going into, and that's really that, and it's not in opposition to what John was just saying, but it really is that we want to be careful about being too prescriptive with the goals so that we're boxing ourselves in and not giving the, being flexible and broad enough that the work groups can really move through this and put together the plans around each of these areas. I think we want to be careful about respecting that process and letting there be some freedom in developing those ideas. And so focusing on broader, I love this succinctness, some of those goals, and really having these broader statements, and then really focusing on that work in the next level as we're moving forward in this process. I think that would be, I'm a fan of flexibility in these broader things and then really honing in when we're doing the deep dive.
Couldn't have been said better at the appropriate time. I think, Michael, you would agree with that. You've done a lot to set this conversation up for the next.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. Really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Any more for us today?
No, that's for me.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just pause. That's awesome. Thank you.
We're going to shift to water, and which is another thing we just mentioned. Welcome, Jennifer and Judy. Good to see you, and I've seen other water experts in the room, so we'll have a chance to hear your presentation and have a dialogue.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. I'm Judy Sventek. I'm the manager of the Water Resources Group, and along with me is Jen Kostrzewski, who's a planning analyst in our group. We are just part of the larger group that's working on the Water Resources Policy Plan, but we're here to present to you today. This is kind of a starting conversation similar that you had with the transportation staff several months ago, kind of setting the stage, laying the framework for the TPP, Transportation Policy Plan Update, sorry about the acronym. So we're here today to kind of really talk to you about the Water Resources Policy Plan. This plan has actually, we've been working on this plan since really 2019. We started with some information sessions with our Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee and their Technical Advisory Committee to help us develop some of the issues. So we've been doing a lot of work. So we're going to kind of go through what the plan is today, how we're going about developing the plan, where we're at in the process, because we are kind of about midway through the process, and then really what is next up. So we're not going to have specific policies or details about that right now. We are going to talk about some of the issue papers we've been working on, and Jen will be talking about that in a little bit. So we have some of that information, but a lot of this information is yet to be developed, to come, and we'll be working more closely with the Environment Committee as we move forward to kind of develop some of this out and then bring back to the Committee of the Whole at appropriate times. So what is the Water Resources Policy Plan? It's really a required part of the Regional Development Guide. It has the purpose of, Water Resources Policy Plan is really, the current one was adopted in 2015, and it's being updated right now along with the whole Regional Development Guide and the other policy plans and system plans. The current Water Resources Policy Plan has this overall goal to ensure sustainable water resources for the region, matches up nicely with our vision of clean water for future generations. And then it includes policies for the main areas of our water responsibilities, which are wastewater and water supply planning, water resources planning and management, and then it also includes the wastewater system plan. It contains this overall water sustainability goals and then policies and strategies throughout the policy plan in our different planning areas that really support that water sustainability goal. Throughout all this, the water policy plan really is committing the council to take actions in the areas of long-range visioning and planning, regional system investments, facility management, technical assistance, research and assessment, and partnerships. So the Metro Area Water Supply Plan is another document that we are required to do an update as well. This time around is going to be part of the Water Resources Policy Plan. It has a little bit of different statutory requirements and legislation about it, so we'll get into a little bit about that in a minute. But it's being updated right now. And it really ties to, all of this work ties to the Regional Development Guide, which then ties to the Water Policy Plan, which then feeds into what goes into that Metro Area Water Supply Plan. And from there, we have the local comprehensive plans that are prepared, which have to do like a local sewer plan, a local water supply plan, and a local surface water management plan. So we've been working closely with our partners to help develop these plan pieces that will go into the final plan. We have, like I said, been working with the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, which I'll give a few more slides. I'll give some more information on that, as well as we have a water advisory group that we set up that we are working with on this policy work. So I want to go in a little bit more detail about the current plan. The current plan is really a plan that it provides direction for the communities on what they need to do for their local planning piece related to water, but it's also a guide for the work we do in environmental services related to wastewater, water supply, and water resources protection and management. The plan focuses on integrating the water work that we do, so knowing that what we do in the area of water supply has impacts on wastewater and vice versa. So we really went with the last round of plans into an approach where we try to integrate the work to make sure that it's all connected. We also are responsible for monitoring and assessing the region's lakes, rivers, and streams. So there's a big piece in our water policy plan that talks about the assessment work we're doing, looking at that. We work closely with the Pollution Control Agency and provide them our data, and they use that as they're doing impaired waters assessments and things like that. So it all factors into how we're gonna look and ensure, it's how we're gonna measure if we have those sustainable water resources. And then other pieces of the current plan, and we have sections on water conservation and reuse. We have our investment policies for how we're gonna invest in our system, the wastewater system, and on other areas. New this time around, we're really taking a stronger look at climate planning. And as I said before, new also, we will have the Metro Area Water Supply Plan as part of the water policy plan. So this really gives a snapshot of what the current 2040 plan has at the main sections of policy in it. It's really, there's the overall goal of sustainable water resources, then there's the different policy areas, and all of those blue squares or rectangles up there. So we have policies on how we're gonna work to protect the region's resources through our watershed approach, using the approaches that are already in place, how we're gonna work on having sustainable water supplies, and a lot of that work is also being done through the Metropolitan Area Master Water Supply Plan. And then, as I mentioned, we were assessing the resources. We have policies on surveying how we're going to serve urban and rural growth through the wastewater system. We have policies on how we're going to address and work on the private wastewater systems, as well as inflow and infiltration, overall water sustainability, wastewater system financing, and investment in conservation and reuse. As I mentioned earlier, the Water Resources Policy Plan is really part of the overall Regional Development Guide. So that, as you know, includes the land use, housing, parks, transportation policies, as well as the parks, transportation, and wastewater system plans. So for this plan update, we are starting by looking at the existing conditions related to water, the emerging changes, taking into consideration all the hard work you've been doing on the regional vision and values and how that will direct the work we do in our policy plan. So this is a timely conversation after the last conversation you just had. And then that will set the stage for the water policy plan and how we go deeper into that plan, developing goals for water related goals, and then policies will be set to help us achieve those goals and objectives, and then we'll have implementation strategies to measure how we're getting things done and actions to make sure we're implementing the right things. I'm sure you've probably seen this slide before. It's based on the 10-year planning cycle. So it started off with the 2020 census information, which is led to what's being worked on with the new updates of the forecast for employment and growth. We've been working since, like I said, 2019, but really digging in deep on it since 2021 on the Regional Development Guide, and then working on the water policy plan and the system plans. That'll all lead to plans being adopted at the end of 2024. System statements will be sent out to communities, and they'll have 3 years to update their comprehensive plans and submit them in here for you all to review and make sure that they're consistent with our policy plans. Specific to the water policy plan, we started this work, I said, back in 2019, but we really jumped into it in 2022. With input from our partners, and we had met with the Environment Committee, we met with MOSAC, which is our Metro Area Water Advisory Committee, and Technical Advisory Committee on that. We met with them ahead of time, tried to identify what these new issue areas are that we need to look at related to water. So that's what we've been working on for the last year and a half. We took those issues, which Janice can talk about in a minute. We worked on research papers for those, and now we're in the process of taking results of those research papers, getting input from our partners, input from you, to help us then refine and decide where we're going to go with policy direction. And then we'll be laying that out over the rest of this year and into early next year. Now, I did want to mention, I talked about 2 advisory groups. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on those. We have our Water Advisory Group, which was appointed by the council members. You approved the membership of that. And it was set up, and this is the first time we've done this, where we've had an official advisory committee that we've been working with to help develop and design and give us guidance ahead of the policy plan development. And it's made up of representatives from cities and watershed administrators mainly. And we have wastewater experts, water supply experts, stormwater experts helping advise where we're going with this policy plan. And I just wanted to show you this. This shows a representation of the memberships that we have. So we have somebody or at least one person from each county. It looks like we have more representation in Scott and Carver counties. It's really because those two representatives are with the watersheds, which cover the entire county. So we have good representation across. We also have members who are responsible for larger cities, smaller cities, watersheds of different sizes, as well as we have a rural center administrator on our staff to help us, on this group, to help us advise us. And then the other group I mentioned several times is the Metro Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, and then we have a technical advisory group of that. We are working closely with them. This group is set up in different statutory language and direction for our water supply work, but they are responsible then for developing the Metro Area Water Supply Plan, which is really more of an implementation tool for the water supply related policies in the Water Resources Plan. So we've been getting direction and guidance from them. Councilmember Wolf chairs that, so she's been involved with this explicitly. So I just wanted to explain to you about this makeup. This group is made up of MOSAC, is what we call it for short. MOSAC is made up of 4 members from 4 surrounding counties: Wright, Sherburns, Isanti, and Chisago. Then we have memberships from 1 person from each of the 7 counties, and 2 of those have to be county reps, and the other 5 are city reps. And then we have somebody from St. Paul Regional Water Services, and then we have representatives from the State Agency of Department of Agriculture, Department of Natural Resources, Pollution Control Agency, and the Department of Health. The Technical Advisory Committee is appointed by MOSAC, and basically is representing communities throughout the region and then a few state agencies. Right now, we're in the process of reappointing members for both of these groups. We're starting with MOSAC because most of the terms expired, so the governor's office is in the process of reviewing applications. Almost all of the members in MOSAC have reapplied, so we're hoping they are reappointed. And then there was a few vacancies, so we're hoping to fill those, and we're hoping to have that done to help guide our water supply work as well as our water resources policy plan work. We're hoping to have that done by sometime in July, so that we have these members on board for their next meeting in August, because we're under, as you know, a very tight time frame. We have to get these plans done by July, so we really need to get them on board and moving forward on this. And this just is a graphic that kind of shows you the same thing that we're working with MOSAC, the TAC, and who are appointed by the MOSAC's appointed legislations from the legislature to the conditions around the appropriations and what we get funding for and how we set up MOSAC and their responsibilities, working with the council, and then all working with all the other policy areas. And then finally, before I turn it over to Jen, I really wanted to emphasize that we've been working on an engagement outreach since the beginning of this. We're trying it different this time around. Our process has been, we need input up front throughout the process and at the end of the process. Last time we spent a lot of time doing all the work up front and then got the reactions at the end, input from the public at the end, and we're trying to do it differently this time around, so we really get that engagement throughout, buy-in from the region, buy-in from our stakeholders and our partners. So we've had already meetings with the Metropolitan Area Water Supply Advisory Committee, the TAC, the Water Resources Advisory Group. We're setting up sub-regional groups, which there'll be sub-regions that cover all the metropolitan area that we'll have conversations with them to help us really refine and develop the water supply part of this plan, as well as that will then feed into the policies for related to water supply for the water policy plan as well. So we've already talked to several groups, the MOSAC and TAC and WAG, about, like I said earlier, the new issues we should investigate. They've been working with us on our research papers, helping refine where we go with policy direction on that. We plan to then, after the research papers are kind of like finalized, they're going to be on the website soon, and then there'll be opportunities for others to provide input as well. And then once draft policy is developed, we plan to go out and talk to these stakeholders again. And then, of course, at the end, we'll do the formal public process with everybody when the formal process starts, probably I'm guessing like July of August next year kind of thing. So that's kind of a lot and really a quick assessment of basically the process we're doing, but I just want you to be assured we've been working on this for several years, got a year and a half left to go, and we're really excited about to work with you, to begin more work with you on this and helping draft those policies and really get us to the next level, which will then, helping develop the policy, the metrics that we can measure, that we make sure that we're getting the things we need to get done for the region, and just so that we can make sure we're on track. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. Chair, council members. Thank you for having me, having us. I have the opportunity to discuss with you a really fun project that we have been working on. And it did start in 2019, and we've been working on it pretty much up until, when I left my desk today when I was working with communications. I'm still working on it. When we started the Water Resources Policy Plan process, we took a moment to reflect, which was, I think, the smartest thing that we have done so far. And we realized that before we start going in and starting this process and engaging, we needed to take a moment to assess really what are the water issues that are affecting the region. And what do we know about them? What do we know about the background just generally? And what do we know specifically about how they would impact our region? And so that's the purpose of this project, is to take a moment to work with staff and to work with our stakeholders to start having those conversations about what are those pressing problems within the water world that we need to start thinking about now and as we are looking towards 2050. And when we had those conversations, we ended up landing on 7 distinct topics. And I say distinct somewhat ironically because water just tends to intersect. And while we identified, for instance, protecting source water areas, there's definite overlap with the other 6 paper topics on this screen. And so some of this was just to help us think and frame within different areas. But I do want to acknowledge, as soon as we started and as soon as we even just made the list, we knew there was going to be natural intersections between this and, quite frankly, some of the other work that the council does. And so when we started these topics, we knew that this was going to be an undertaking. And we knew that because these are such broad topics, we needed to bring in multiple perspectives. And so we created different teams within environmental services staff. Each one of these papers had a team that had one representative from the water supply background, one or two, I won't say just one, representation from the water supply background, from the water resources management background, and from the wastewater background. And those authoring teams were empowered to start thinking about these topics, developing background, having conversations to generate content so that we would have conversation internally first to, quite frankly, learn what we all do with water, because we are a pretty large division, but it was really interesting sometimes to learn, oh, that is what we do. That is great. So we had some internal learning, and then we went out to our stakeholders to make sure that what we had gathered and what we had written from a regional perspective resonated to that local perspective. And so we went, as Judy explained, to many of our different advisory groups and to many of our different stakeholder groups, just to have that gut check of what we have created within these research papers make sense to us as regional planners, but also that it makes sense at the watershed, the city, at the various aspects of where water impacts us all within the region. And so what I'm going to share with you in these following slides is a very distilled message from each one of these papers. The papers in general, although we really did have the best intent to keep them short, it turns out water is complicated and we needed a couple or 50 or so pages within for each of these topics to generate
50 each.
50 each.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, at least. Again, we had the best intents. The good news is there are executive summaries as well, so I would encourage you to check those out. So I'm giving you distilled messages from each one of these papers. I also will share a little bit later in the presentation how and where we will be sharing these papers online. So if you do want to dig in a little bit deeper in any of these areas, please either feel free to talk to Judy and I or others within environmental services, but also they will be available on the website for you and for public consumption. So the first topic that we're talking about is protecting source water areas. We need to protect our source waters so that we have water to drink. If we can't have clean waters to support our region, frankly, we don't have a region. It's one of those foundational services that we need to continue so that we can grow and have a prosperous region. And so the three messages that this team wanted to bring to light, if this was all we had to talk about, was that upfront investment in regional source water protection avoids hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in treatment and cleanup costs. And so it's that concept of prevention is very much so more cheaper than cleaning up in the end. Additionally, they wanted to point out that public water suppliers in the Department of Health are responsible for providing safe drinking waters, but they do not have the land use planning and land ownership rights within these management areas. And so that is an area in which the council does have some authority and potentially could be a player, and is a player, within this area of water management. And then lastly, understanding and collaborations are vital to protect the land areas in these sources of the region's water supply, especially because water does not pay attention to political boundaries, which is exciting and also a little bit frustrating in this career. And so this does mean that we need to start working together as to where those different source water areas extend and overlap and bring collaboration together for those partners. The next topic that I'm going to discuss is our rural concerns, our rural water concerns. Rural lands help to define our region, and if they are not managed and planned for properly, rural land uses, development, and agricultural practices can negatively impact water bodies and drinking water sources. And so knowing that mindset from the beginning, these are some of the key points that they wanted to share with you all. Is that improved and expanded collaboration between partners is critical for the success, and it's a current gap for the council, something that we could look into with this new plan. Protecting our rural lands and understanding rural water concerns are crucial for achieving sustainable water resources within the metro region. Rural water issues are complex. Climate change, infrastructure, land use, and land use changes all impact water quantity and quality. And while we did put that point on the rural concern slide, I will say that does apply across the board. So that is something to just keep in mind. Unfortunately, we don't just have one easy challenge. We have a lot of intersecting challenges. And then lastly, rural areas are important for natural resource protection and groundwater recharge areas for water wells. So places in which we have some active agricultural farming also are some of the best places for water to recharge our aquifers. And so we need to start considering that as we are deciding what land uses happen within the region, and thinking about it from the hydrologic cycle as well. Our next paper topic that we had a team work on was wastewater planning and service considerations. We provide wastewater collection and treatment services for over 2.7 million residents of this region. And so this paper focuses on current and future concerns that we must keep in mind to best plan for this system and for our region. And so within this paper, this team acknowledged that we currently provide high quality, affordable, and sustainable wastewater collection and treatment services, and that this supports environmental protection and a growing and prosperous region for a high quality of life. We do that currently, and we want to commit to doing that into the future. So that is one of those commitments that's within this paper, and I will say, like, it might be a spoiler alert, but it probably will carry through to the Water Resources Policy Plan as well. We have also, within this paper, identified working with community partners and incentivizing private property I&I, or inflow and infiltration reduction, through technical and financial grants assistance is very vital to addressing those local sources. That can help make sure that we have the capacity for the wastewater in our system and that we're not treating clear water as it gets into our system. And then lastly, within this paper, we will strive to build and rehabilitate facilities in an equitable way while engaging traditionally underrepresented communities in the planning and construction process. So we acknowledge that we have been making investments within our region. And so framing it within this way of ensuring equitable investments is one of those things that have been brought to light within this paper and other efforts that have been happening within environmental services. This next paper is a mouthful, and I usually shorten it to water availability, just because I usually stumble over the next one. But water availability, access, and use. Our water comes to our region through precipitation or is drawn from our aquifers to provide water supply. It's used for various uses, including supply, recreation, industrial uses, etc. You can all think of the different ways that you would like to use water. It is then treated and returned to the environment. And that's what this paper starts talking about. It's framing it from extraction to use and thinking about the different users that use water, including ecosystems. So we're not just focusing on the human connections, we also are thinking about those natural systems. And then how that water is returned to the environment. In order for this water to be sustainable, it must be available, accessible, and at the right quality so that we can use it. This paper delves into some of those complexities within that cycle within the region. And so the 3 key points are on the screen there. I won't read all of them, but I will focus on the middle one where we must keep in mind the impacts and our responses to natural limitations, social and economic constraints, regulatory decisions, amongst others, in our efforts to retain sustainable waters. This is going to be, it's an easy water cycle, but when we start applying society and different built environment constraints, it makes it a little bit harder for water to move through. So it's something that we need to consider within this paper. Water and climate. Climate change is a global concern that will primarily manifest itself through water in our region. Addressing this current concern requires regional planners, water utilities, and local planners to use mitigation and adaptation concepts to limit negative consequences for metro region residents, ecosystems, businesses, and others. And so, again, we do want to reiterate that, and you all have had these conversations within climate, we'll continue to have these conversations, but climate change will impact the way that our water resources function, just naturally. But it will also impact our infrastructure and the services provided to communities, businesses, and residents in the region. So it's something that we need to keep in mind while framing the services that we do provide for the region. Climate will continue to become more volatile without any sort of greenhouse gas reduction. So mitigation is one of those strategies that we will have to employ as we look towards the future. But we can't just rely on mitigation. We do know that the climate has already changed and will continue to change. And so as we are building this region or helping our communities build this region, we do have to have some tools and resources to help them adapt to that changing future. So this paper covers some of those concepts, some of those suggestions, and it's one of my personal favorites. It's a very good one. I love them all. I shouldn't pick. I do not have a favorite. Favorite for all my children. We did have a paper on water reuse. This is also a really interesting paper. Water reuse is one tool in our toolkit to help us sustain our water resources. This paper addresses both stormwater and wastewater reuse for the region. And we do have some key messages within this. The one that I'm going to actually focus on is that the Metro currently needs clear, safe, and consistent stormwater reuse guidance from state agencies to help with this broader implementation. We know that the agencies are coming together to have those conversations, but it's something that is necessary, and it's something that we do hear from our local communities, that they need this guidance so that they can create systems that can provide safe reuse water, but also affordable reuse water. So hopefully we're not putting any additional constraints that might slow that down. The other part that I want to highlight is that currently economic and environmental conditions don't encourage reuse within our region. However, we are seeing some hyper-localized drivers that might be pushing and shifting that calculation in certain areas in which the tool of reuse might become more relied upon to offset our potable water demands. And lastly, and probably the largest topic and paper that was potentially the hardest to write because it just had connections everywhere within water, is our water quality paper. It affects all of our core services and environmental services and is one of the primary determinants when we start considering what water outcomes look like. And so water quality contamination and its consequences impact public health, ecosystem functions, and affects regional and economic competitiveness. We know that the future holds a lot of uncertainty for water quality, including regulatory changes, climate changes, population growth and density. All of this is going to impact the quality of our waters and how we interact with our waters. And then lastly, I want to definitely highlight this bullet point at the very end, is that not all residents within the region will be impacted by water quality concerns equally. And we do have a role in lessening the burdens on those vulnerable, marginalized, and underinvested communities within the region. So those are the paper topics and the key points. We just finished writing those papers, which is a very impressive milestone, and we all did take like a mini celebratory lap around the third floor. And we learned a lot from this exercise from the organization. So I do, well, we will take a break. I won't say we should do this right again, but I do hope we continue to do this policy research and not just once a decade. We learned a lot as an organization, and we learned a lot from our stakeholders with this exercise. The next step with these papers is to go out and engage on these topics. And we know that we can't be everywhere all the time. And so one of the solutions to that problem, or a difficulty that we had with this, is where do we store these papers? How can we get the feedback? And the answer was our website. And so I'm going to walk you through how to find these research papers, because I will acknowledge sometimes it is hard to navigate on our website. And I do hope that as you engage with your constituents, if there's a topic area that makes sense for you to share, please share this with them. If there's a topic area that you want to dig into, please come onto the website and check it out. So step one is to click on the link for wastewater and water up at the top on the banner. It will create a drop-down. And so I will encourage you to then click on the planning button that drops down. It will take you to our integrated water website. On the left-hand side, there is a bar, a navigation bar. And so there is an item that says, and I apologize, it's small, 2050 Water Resources Policy Plan Update. If you click on that, so now I know we are a couple pages deep, but hopefully we followed along. If you scroll down that page halfway through, there is a topic area that says Research for Water Resources Policy Plan. And right now we do have 2 papers up. So we have the water reuse paper up and the water quality paper up. The Protecting Source Water Areas is gonna drop tomorrow. This is actually hot off the presses. It's gonna come. And then the subsequent papers will continue to be put online as we work with communications to get them up there. Just in case you don't want to follow that pathway, I did put a QR code on this screen, and I do have the URL on the bottom there. So however you want to get there, we hope that you do get there. We have already put 2 papers up. The third one is coming, and then the rest are going to be put on throughout the rest of this month and into July and August as we're working with communications. Our hope is that by the time fall comes around, or early or late summer, we will be able to start engaging all of our stakeholders and pointing them to this website. When they do get there, there is a plain language summary of what the papers say. Some of it, then there's the recommendations that our teams have put forward so that we can spark discussion, ideally, with the community. And then there's a feedback form in which anyone who comes can provide content or information that they would like to add to the discussion about these papers. And so, with all of that, the last topic that we have is what's next for the Water Resources Policy Plan. We will continue to work with our stakeholders as Judy defined. We will start looking backwards at some of our previous plans, both the 2040 plan and the Water Resources Policy plans from before that. Because there's good content. Unfortunately, some of our water problems haven't changed too much over time. And so we can look to previous plans and see what we were thinking then. We're going to incorporate that in addition to those conversations that you're having with Mike about the vision and values. And that will help us define where we are going with our potential objectives and policies. We will continue to engage about those potential objectives. Also considering our ability to implement, partner, and influence with that. And hopefully in the end, out of that full process, we will have some draft objectives and policies. Throughout this, we will be engaging with the Environment Committee and our other advisories along the way. And so it's going to be an exciting process. And hopefully at the end, the results will come. So with that, thank you very much.
Congratulations on your milestone.
Thank you. Yeah. I did want to add, if you have any groups that you're meeting with and that you want us to present about these papers or any part of the water policy, we'd be happy to do that. Just let us know. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We have an engagement plan, but we're, really want to know if there's others out there that we can work with.
Great work. Cal, we have to hear from you for that.
Well, your whole, reverse approach, I just have to commend you because I think that really is getting this engagement out, plus the research, plus the thinking of what do we know that we don't know, that we're gonna wanna know, and getting that visioning out there, about the problems that we think we're gonna have, all is really gonna set this foundation for your policy plan going forward, I think. And it's just such a critical issue. And of course, I represent District 11, which has two of the bigger issues for the metro region. And so I was curious on how, the new Wiper Lake Water Management Team project is going to intersect in all of this.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Teeterberg. So the Whitebear Lake project is, we've been given $2 million by the legislature to pull together a group of stakeholders, a working group to help define and develop a sustainable water resources plan for the Whitebear Lake area, basically allowing for growth to continue as well as protection of the lake. So it's really a water supply issue with the water supply drawdowns have been causing impacts on the Whitebear Lake, and the drought is causing impacts. So we're putting together it's a group there's representation from the Department of Natural Resources, the PCA, and Health Department, as well as all the communities in the 5-mile radius of Whitebear Lake. So we'll be working with them and starting that up later this year. So to answer that question, that study is not technically done until 2027. So it will feed into the policy as best we can. It'll probably be one of those things that we reference in the plan that is something we're working on to promote, to get to this end product, because it fits nicely within our sustainability goals, as well as, this is work we're doing to promote the sustainability, make sure ensure that we have sustainable resources for growth in that area. So it'll kind of a work in progress. We'll have to figure it out, and we'll be doing some studies as part of that effort that will be able to feed into this policy work, but we will have to have some of the policy before that will be done.
Just a follow-up too, and your 7 topics, they're not silos. And so I just let everybody know, remind everybody that they're so interrelated. So, maybe 80%, 60%. So you really have a spider web of policies that are going to be interconnected. So it's a lot to keep track of. It's a lot for us to keep track of. And anything I can do to help to, like I said, I like the idea of if people are contacting me, I can get the papers, I can send them to you, I can send them out. But yeah, the water's not a silo. It's one water, it's everywhere. And all these issues are interconnected. So thank you for looking at such a complex issue with some structure to help us navigate all these issues.
And Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cedarburg, one of the things we have some recommended actions or next steps, or even sort of preliminary policy directions in each of the white papers. Our next step will be to look at all of the recommendations we have from all of them and try to, there's some that overlap, as you mentioned, so we'll kind of be able to hone in on them and kind of fine tune them based on that, because there's some that are definitely overlapping. So that would be our next exercise, is how that all fits together. So,
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cedarburg, I'm known for using the software Mural. And so I have already started just putting all of these Post-it notes up, and I zoomed out and then just turned it off. That's a lot of recommendations. So we will see how it all comes together.
That's a great piece of software. It's fun.
Great, Dilka.
Thank you. I have a question. Is there, in this report, is there a page where I can look at the map of communities that have underinvested water infrastructure and communities that actually have currently water issues? I don't know who they are, but it would be really good to know.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, we actually are in the process of writing an 8th paper, which I didn't want to tell my colleagues. They actually might come after me. This is a public meeting, everyone will not know. And so we've brought on an intern this summer to help with some of this work, but thinking from water from an equity standpoint. Within each paper, there was a mandatory part of the template that within each of these different areas, we asked our colleagues to reflect on how equity would connect to these topic areas. But it ended up splitting a lot of really good content into 7 different papers. And so what we're having our intern help us with is bringing together those different equity topic sections into one paper. And so it will help us bring all of those ideas into a cohesive location, but not yet. But I actually really do like your recommendation of digging into some of those data. And so I think that also will be put on his work plan. So thank you very much. It's a good suggestion.
Robert?
Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. First is a question. I'm really intrigued. Great work. This is really exciting to learn about all this. And I'm really intrigued by the reuse efforts that you discussed and the hyper-local reuse efforts, and I have no idea what that really means. And so I'm wondering if you could give me the 45-second primer on what a hyper-local water reuse system is.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lilligren. So the reuse paper looks at pockets of where there's potential, better potential for doing reuse. I think Jen was referring to more like, as part of the White Bear Lake study, where reuse will be looked at to see if that's one of the solutions that can help offset some of the resource implications there. And then we've had a couple industries talk to us over the years about potentially reusing of wastewater. We've looked into it. Right now it's kind of limited by the fact that our wastewater effluent, while it's treated, has too much chlorine, so there'd be extra treatment that'd have to be there. So that would, those are things, there'd be other treatments that would need to be done before we could reuse it in certain cases. So I think it really was to get at, there are opportunities, there is a lot of stormwater reuse going on, and it is kind of in different pockets across the region. There could be more, and what we're really trying to get the Pollution Control Agency and the Health Department to kind of bring that group back together to kind of help really define what it takes to do stormwater reuse, because the guidelines are very unclear. It's not sure if you have to have treatment related to it, and this is more than 45 seconds, I'm sorry.
No,
and so just to get those details out there so more people know how they can do it, where they can do it, and make it more affordable, because it is still a little bit more costly than the others.
I mean, this is like using for your garden or your, like an individual basis?
So, Mr. Chair, a lot of it is people are reusing water. They're taking it from a storm pond. They're reusing it to water a golf course, irrigation. But there is a project that we funded in the city of Waconia that they're actually taking they're reusing a storm pond in a community where they have development there. They've actually treated it to the right level, and they actually have hooked it up so all the citizens in that area can then use it to water their lawn. So that's kind of a unique situation where it's allowing the homeowners in that area to actually reuse that treated stormwater. Most cases, it's a city using it to water their lawns or ball fields or golf courses.
Gotcha.
Cool. Mr. Chair, I think during my time on the Minneapolis City Council, we redesigned our stormwater management fees and incentivized really hyper-local, property by property reuse. So I think that's really interesting. And then I'm just going to say this other piece, because I don't know that I'll ever get another opportunity here, and I don't know that it will really have an impact on the water resource policy plan, but just in my day-to-day life, I seem to be engaging in a lot more projects and issues around water, mostly the river, which I know isn't the only source that we have here, but it's a pretty significant one. And then just in the communities and cultures I belong to, water has been elevated to such a level, a spiritual level almost. And the phrase "water is life," Minnewachuny in Dakota, I hear that almost every day, multiple times a week. And there are people in my communities that I interact with that are self-declared water protectors, and so there's a whole sort of indigenous vibe to the treatment of water. Again, I don't quite see how it would intersect with the policy plan and the pace that's going. But as you're talking about equity in water and the equity paper that's being sprung on people, that I just want to lift that up. And just in a few of the projects I've been involved in, Walk on Teepee being one here, the Locken Dam in Minneapolis. There's such a different way of talking about water at a policy level than I've heard in the past, and I'm intrigued by what that might mean to an organization like ours that is so concerned with both freshwater, stormwater, and wastewater. Thanks.
Wendy?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Following up on Councilmember Lilligren's comments, the Shakopee Mid-Wacaton Sioux community has also been very involved in water reuse, and they have a neighborhood that has a little treatment thing so that they can water from stormwater. And then they also, they have their own wastewater plant, and they treat that to the point where they can use it for irrigation within the casino area with the golf course and all of the grassy areas around the casinos and whatnot as well.
Okay. That's great. Jen?
Sure. Just wanted to, we did have a presentation last night. Very good. Yeah, a lot of questions. But again, being the equity committee, we also looked at, there's like 600 employees. What percentage are diverse? How do we get young people involved in environmental services? And we looked at also what communities are impacted and how by the way we're doing. Anything else you want to add? But it was well received. It was a good meeting, and people were very engaged.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, we shared with the EAC last night an opportunity that some of the staff within environmental services are participating in, and it's a learning cohort with the U.S. Water Alliance to learn about water equity. And so there are over 30, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but over 30 utilities that are part of this network. Some have been a little bit longer at the game than we are, and so it's a very good ecosystem that's created by this nonprofit Water Alliance so that we can have peer-to-peer learning, and we can learn from those utilities or planning organizations that are a little bit further along on their equity path, or some that are a little bit behind us, and we can help lift them up with our learnings and experience. And so the opportunities that we're going to be working with the U.S. Water Alliance is considering their framework and considering what fits within the system that we currently have within the Twin Cities to try and see where there's opportunities for us to integrate equity at a more fundamental part of the work that we do. And so it's a very exciting program that we are working on. The other part of it is thinking about how we can connect with community organizations, either as an anchor institution or helping support existing anchor institutions as well. I don't want to take away the privilege from other organizations, but thinking where we are doing our work within a water utility or a water planning group and making those connections with organizations to perhaps do other stuff in addition to, while staying within our purview. So connections would be thinking about workforce and bringing on community organizations to help with that, or thinking about ways to simplify processes to make it a little bit more easily accessible for public to engage with us when we have these conversations, or just working with communities as we're going out there within our capital investments within the region. So there's a lot of different opportunities that we will have within this program, and we're excited to learn and then also integrate that. And there's a natural connection and perfect timing with the Water Resources Policy Plan as well. So it just dovetails very nicely.
Right. Excellent. Any other thoughts, comments? Well, Jennifer, Judy, thank you so much. Clearly, you have struck a chord of interest, and we really look forward to being part of this engagement process, and give you more feedback. And you pointed us in the right direction on the websites.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great work, everyone. I think that is our.
Mr. Chair, can I, this is something that might be more appropriate for a full council meeting, but since it was just this morning, I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible work of the City of Bloomington and the team at Minnesota 2020 Expo, or 2020 Expo 2027. Unfortunately, if you saw the news, we did not get the bid. The United States wasn't awarded. It was the third highest vote getter, but still incredible work that team did in promoting our states across the nation, across the globe. And so I just really want to champion the efforts that were made by that team. I know they're not feeling great. I hope they're got some rest today, but it's they've done some really wonderful work, so I wanted to call that out today.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. And for those who participated, I know I did, the themes of wellness and bringing people to Minnesota, I mean, that is not efforts lost.
Yeah.
I agree. I think it was a wonderful effort, and we all learned a lot about our region, what we can do, and there'll be other opportunities to kind of use that energy. But it is disappointing, and I think they're probably pretty disappointed that they're a great group. In the meantime, enjoy the Pride weekend, or Taylor Swift, whichever you're part of.
There'll also be thousands of Kiwanis.
And thousands of Kiwanis are here. So we're putting our best foot forward, and I have to say, Metro Transit is front and center.
Yeah.
So let's just support them and thank, this is also Transit Employee Appreciation Day, and there was a lot of energy around thanking our frontline employees. Ironically, you know, we talk about shortages, which we have at least almost as many as 20 people who are being trained now to be able to train operators. And we have more bus employees who are coming online every month, and we're in August again, we're going to be adding more schedules. So, you know, and the crime statistics over this past month has been remarkably positive. So I kind of feel good about where we are, and we have a lot to feel proud about. So, thanks everyone, and this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Fantastic.